Well, this is our last lecture. We did the semester. It's amazing as it is. Well, we will have done it after today. Okay, so we did the male nude last time, and this time it is a female nude that we're going to concentrate on. Interestingly enough, there isn't really as much in Greek art on female nude as there is on male, and the reason being that the Greeks disapproved of disrobing females until the middle of the 4th century, whereas of course with the males they began actually
they approved of disrobing males.
I know, exactly. And then of course with so much that has been lost, the majority that we know of is of course, as always, the Roman copies. So what I will be doing here, I will go through as much as possible on Greek, and then I will mix in the attempts of, and very successful attempts in fact, of the Renaissance and then Baroque artists, who essentially had a goal to recreate classical nude. In fact, indeed, when Canova, whom actually I didn't even include here, but when he sculpted in the 18th century, 19th century, he was proclaimed as the new Greek master of perfection. So we'll be doing that because you see, the Renaissance artists were as frustrated, frankly, as we are today, and they had more than we do. Also some of the things that I'll be showing, interestingly enough, the 20th century scholars, just as was the case with Praxiteles Hermes, they felt, well, wishful thinking I suppose, that some of the work perhaps hopefully came from the 5th century, but it's pretty much, well, today's scholars at least are convinced that no, those very works were also just excellent copies.
So it kind of, I'm just saying, I just wanted, it kind of follows this whole idea that just as with Greek myth echoing through time and influencing our modern sensibilities, Greek art does the exact same thing. It echoes through time, and to the point that you can really find Greek art anywhere.
Oh yes.
Certainly the influences of it.
Oh,
anyway,
everywhere.
You would
and we'll see.
You will be very hard pressed.
Oh yeah, even modern, even the so-called
especially
modern artists,
the modern artists.
As much as they destroyed the imagery, but the imagery is still there. Well, it's just the desire was so strong to find something, to find a female nude back in the 5th century. But it seems that not. But of course, as we had seen before, we'll have them very lightly clothed. We will have them in wet drapery, which is what Phidias did, and even before Paionios did that too. Alright, so let's go to the very beginning. With the male nudes, we went essentially to proportion. Ultimately, the same proportion, the same ratio will hold for the female statuary as well, but since we had done it in the last lecture, I'm not going to repeat it. Also, the whole approach to a female nude was different from time immemorial. A woman breeds children. A woman, and as such, she was regarded from time immemorial again as a fertility symbol, a very different fertility symbol. A male's reproductive organ was very much regarded as a fertility symbol, and witness the the Egyptian obelisks. But so the whole approach to a woman's body was different. And here, for instance, two examples. Well, one comes from 3 million, it's 30,000 BC, maybe 25,000 BC. This one is 2,500 BC. But it comes from a town of Willendorf in Austria. She's very small. She's about 4 inches, even though she looks enormous because of all the ovoids and just the abundance of her figure. But when we look at it, what we see really, I mean, there isn't obviously much of a head. It wasn't meant to be used. What was meant to be used is all here. The breasts are here, the abdomen is enormous, the vulva is portrayed very prominently. Obviously, we don't know what those men or women were thinking, 30,000 BC, but by just normal human analysis and comparison, it's rather clear. The arms, as you see, they're just tiny, tiny little arms that are just placed on top of her bosom. On the other hand, the other example that comes from the Greek islands, the Cycladic islands, is very girlish-like, even though all the same attributes are there. The bosom is there, the arms are folded in the exact same fashion, not much of a face, even though presumably it was all painted, and the vulva again is emphasized, but in a very, very different way. And Lord Clark calls them, one is earthy, the other one is celestial. We don't know, but clearly the reduction is taking place in our Cycladic Venus or Aphrodite or the female form. A significant reduction, almost abstract, whereas no such reduction is the case with the Venus of Willendorf. As we go on, this one also, in fact, comes from about the same time as the Venus of Willendorf, and this is ceramic. This is the oldest known ceramic in the world, in fact, and it looks as if it had been fired, but very minimally. It has the same height as the Venus of Willendorf, and here, yeah, made of a clay body fired at a relatively low temperature. Yes, so here too the same things are emphasized. I mean, look at this is the woman who births all the time. She never is not pregnant ever since, well, they certainly didn't have the protective measures, nor was their mentality protective. On the contrary, the more the better. Those were very, very difficult times. People lived in caves, and the strength of the tribe depended on the productivity and the ability to bear children. So the moment the woman could bear children, whether she was 12, 11, maybe even, that's when she began to bear children, and she did so until she died. And this is what we see. This woman has clearly lived to an age where she had produced many children. The breasts are completely extended, as you see, the abdominal area as well. And here you can see her from the side and from the back as well. And so there was nothing celestial about this. This was very much a productive organism, and the pear shape, as you see, again, it's not idealized as the Greeks will, or as the Egyptians, in fact, will idealize as well. And in fact, if a woman constantly is pregnant, her body ultimately will probably return, for the most part, to these sort of a pear-shaped body, and that's what they had observed. Still another also clay figurine, and this one comes from Turkey. She in fact is shown, barely fired clay. She in fact is shown birthing a child. She's sitting in a birthing chair. There's a head of the child right there. She is sitting in a special chair with clearly protective deities, protective animal heads, because these two are animal heads. And this comes from about 6,000 BC from Turkey. And again, the woman's reproductive organs are emphasized here. Here's still another one, also from about 6500 BC. This one is interesting, from 3500, from Cernavoda in Romania, because this is sort of the first time, in fact, here. This is the first time that a prehistoric meaning before writing. So we don't really know anything about them, since nothing was written about them. But it shows human introspection as opposed to just procreative ability. And Romania, yes, well, he's given the name of a thinker, and then a sitting woman. And thus we arrive in Egypt. And in Egypt, well, it's a very hot climate in the first place.
Just, it's crazy how tragic they look. I mean, that people
Oh,
could...
those?
Yeah, just that people could take the time, that
Yes.
they were hungry and
Yes.
cold
Uh-huh.
and dying, and yet what they took the time to record was, let's record how hungry and cold
Right.
we are.
I know.
And it really...
It's true.
There's so much power in the fact that
And it is, they are very powerful.
someone clearly thought, I feel so much agony, let me express it in a way that isn't food and sex.
I know.
I feel this
Right.
intrinsic human need to create and express my deep despair.
Which is extraordinary, because it's not Egypt, I mean, it's Romania.
Right.
Nothing was happening there. But
And yet clearly something was
something
happening.
apparently was
Something
happening.
really profound and
Right.
deeply sad and
Yeah.
really just agonized. That
Yeah. You're right.
We talk about these simple figures today that are done today, but we also remember that whatever inner feelings they were expressing, they were also being made in studios with light and comfort and
of course.
food. So sure, that maybe the feelings they're expressing on the inside are very real, but on top of it, anything like that, these figures were also being made at a time when
It was really real.
when not only were your inner demons against you, but the world.
The world, yeah.
Everything that crawled and walked and
I
snapped.
mean, we don't even know if, there was so many outer demons.
Mm-hmm.
They probably just didn't even have the time for the inner demons.
And yet they had the time for this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, ceramic also. So, Egyptian society, very different. Thank you very much. This was, no, sure. Nudity was common in Egyptian society. Well, for one thing, people in the fields, very many of them simply just didn't wear clothes because, they're working in the field. And but even speaking with the upper crust and, particularly royalty, of course, the fabric was linen for the most part. And interestingly enough, the thinner the linen, the more expensive it is, but also the more transparent it is. And as a result, very often they see through, and we see women's bodies through the sheath, and the sheaths were very simple. While men just wore kilts very often. In this case, this is a statue of Macarinus and his beloved wife, and it's a charming statue. It's a delightful statue. Also, it expresses affection, while it also expresses godliness, because in this case, for the Egyptians, the important part was that they would be godlike, because the Egyptian kings, of course, were considered, the Egyptian royalty were considered as part of the celestial universe, and at some parts fully divine, at other times in Egyptian history partly divine, but certainly divinity was there very much. Also, a number of these statues were believed to be inhabited by a man's or a woman's spirit after they die, so they had to be as perfect as could be. This did not mean to portray them as they were in life, or even not necessarily faces. The Egyptologists do distinguish faces from one pharaoh to another by certain characteristic aspects, but on the whole they are certainly idealized. By focusing on idealism, the representation of a pure, sinless person could remain without conflicting aspects. So the conventions were set sometime in the early Old Kingdom, and the conventions, for the most part, were followed throughout. She appears nude, but she's not. As you see, she's wearing a sheath, and but it is very thin sheath, and her body can be shown. Just as an aside, as you see, she's essentially the same height as the husband. The reason he appears taller is because of the headdress, and she stands pretty much, well, slightly, maybe a couple of inches behind him, but otherwise on par. And in Egyptian society, women were treated considerably, in fact, better than, as we will see, in the Greek society. So this is Egypt, and in this case, again, these are entertainers, and who are obviously of lower rank. But and as they entertain, they entertain in the nude, as you see it here. Fast forward into about 1300s BC, and an extraordinary pair will will appear in Egypt. His name is Akhenaton, and his wife is Nefertiti, and that was a very short period in Egypt when idealism was discarded, and even now you certainly wouldn't say by this gorgeous head, but this head was not in fact an official portrait. It was a model that was found in a sculptor's, in a craftsman's shop, so that he would have a model of his queen, because obviously it was not possible to ask the queen to come and pose. But then this head, however, you see, went with this body, and this is really the first time that in Egypt, and the last actually, because as I said, the period will not last a long time when naturalism kicked in, but it did, and while it did, one could see that Nefertiti's body, in fact, does assume this sort of pear shape that we had seen with our Paleolithic sculptures, while the face, of course, still remains quite stunning. But the conventions remain. I don't even see a sheath here, and she appears to be represented in the nude because, again, for Egypt, the Egyptians did not shirk from representing bodies in the nude. At the same time, however, when you see both of them at home, they're both dressed. Well, he is wearing a tunic. I mean, he is wearing a kilt, and she is, in fact, wearing a sheath. And as I said, this is very unusual because rulers did not show.
Pause.
Me.
Drink some tea.
Did not show themselves and their families. But these rulers did, and as you see, they're a very warm family, sitting with their children, with their 3 daughters, 1, 2, 3, and enjoying the sun, which they worshipped. The daughters also, here are the princesses, and the princesses again are in the nude because it was just, as I said, it was very common. Move on to, and then from Egypt, as much as they of course watched the sky, and we do not have any writings regarding human proportion, even though they obviously observed it and certainly with royal sculptures applied it. Moving on to Crete, and that's the 2nd millennium. You don't see representations of nudity, but the way they dressed exposed the upper body. We don't know where the tradition comes from, but I mean, when you really think, even today's tribal societies that still do exist, nudity is completely normal there, with just the minimum of covering, and no one feels any shame, and with the women as well. So, but as civilizations progressed, well, and obviously in the north there's always a lot more covering than there is in the south, but also as civilizations progressed, it was felt that that a body must be covered. But women's breasts in a number of societies are considered a completely normal sort of thing, and nothing to be ashamed of. And as we see in Crete, well, she's called nominally the snake goddess because she's holding 2 snakes, but we have no idea who she is. Goddess, priestess, prophetess, God, we don't know. But what's interesting is how she's dressed, because she's clearly dressed as women on Crete were dressed: flounced skirt, an apron, and exposed breasts. This is sort of a generic costume, and this obviously is, I think it's a doll actually, but looks great.
CGI.
Is that what it is?
Computer generated.
Computer generated. It looks beautiful.
It does. In the movie Ulysses with Kirk Douglas,
Right.
where they have one of the cultures that they show there takes from here. What they do, which is really interesting, they completely do this style of dress, and for the top where the breasts would be, they use a sheer flesh-like cloth, because they weren't going to expose breasts at that point. It was not yet. It was not yet HBO. But what they do is they basically intone they hint at sort of
that's what it was.
That's what it was. It's kind of like when you watch even when you watch Wonder Woman, the movie that came out in 2017, when you see the Amazons' outfits.
Same?
No, of course not. They're completely different. But they have a leather guard over one of their breasts.
Oh, I see.
And again, like completely inaccurate. Amazons definitely did not shave off one of their boobs when using archery. That would have been, the death toll on that would have been huge.
Yes.
So definitely not a thing. But it's a mistranslation of the word Amazon. But these are things I like. These are cool things in modern costume design to give nods to the origins
sure.
or the myths surrounding the origins.
Yeah, but even you see models on the runways or and today there's again the tendency to expose the breast because all the cuts that go down to the waist and today again there's the same tendency to expose the breast. Okay, you remember this. Now we arrive in Greece, and a woman was come. Period. This also comes from Crete, but this is 1,000 years later. And by this time, yes, a woman definitely is covered. We looked at all of this when we looked at the archaic art, and now really the first time, one of the first images of a nude woman in Greece comes from this mirror handle. There's a mirror on top, and this is a handle. It's early 6th century BC. We're still in time archaic. But she kind of almost looks cycladic. She looks boyish almost. She looks like a young girl. She has no curves, no hips. She stands, the weight is evenly distributed. The breasts are just slightly protruding. But there's also a very sort of definite Eastern Syriac feel to it, including these human-headed birds that almost look like sphinxes. So all of that just breathes the Eastern sensibility, and as I said, she looks like a young girl, just barely developing. Certainly not a mature woman. So this is really one of the first instances. Another one that also comes from the 6th century, and that is that's on the vase. And interestingly, the women here are portrayed taking a shower, taking a real shower, because the water flows, as you see, from these gargoyles, literally from in the shape of wild pigs, of wild boars, and there must be someone in the back who is operating the pump. But the water does come, and you can see the water flowing, and the women. But there's nothing idealized here, of course. There's nothing. This is just a representation of a normal activity. Perhaps not a daily activity, but an activity nonetheless. This is the natural form. Moving on to about 500, and still even now the individual sculptures, they're all closed. So we only really see these nudes appearing on these the utilitarian objects, such as a mirror, or in this case pottery. And in this pottery, it's not quite clear what she's doing, but she is sitting on a cushion. She's certainly fully developed. I mean, that breast is enormous, in fact. When you consider that this is where her abdomen is, the breast is very much protruding. She seems as if she's putting on some shoes or tying up a sandal. She's wearing something like a turban, and a necklace. A necklace and perhaps some bracelets. But otherwise she is, here's another nude figure, portrayed doing something without really aware of us, of an observer, and as such is not made for admiration, just as I said, for some utilitarian purpose this vessel was made. And then of course the most utilitarian purposes were the pornoi as opposed to the heterae, because the Greek society will develop the women, the respectable women, will be looked upon as minor and as minors, and kept in gynecium. I probably talked about it when we talked about the Greek society at the time. And but there were two types of women who could walk around, and well, one was just a prostitute, and they were called pornoi, and that's where we get our word for pornography. And the other one will be a heterae, who was a woman of obviously much higher class, who was very educated, in fact, and who was a courtesan, who, I mean, Pericles' future wife will begin as a heterae. So now, because of course prostitution is the oldest profession, as we know, and in all societies, wherever we go, we always find imagery of sexual imagery and the sexual positions that pertain to that imagery. An object that was very convenient and very logical to be decorated with this kind of imagery is a drinking cup. In this case, a kylix. It's called a kylix. It's flat with a couple of handles. Yeah, here are the handles. This is what it looks like. And then in the kylixes, very often we do find scenes of pornography. Well, this one is from about 490 BC. I can imagine they probably museums have many of those. They just don't exhibit them, but there are probably a number of them that go back into the 6th century. But here is obviously a woman who is at some sort of a dinner gathering, and she's playing katabas. I mean, with a very serious weapon. My God, this is vessel. Playing katabas with something like this. Granted, katabas means that the wine had been drunk, and only the dregs are at the bottom, and then you grab one of the handles and throw the dregs at a bull point. But still, this is a very serious drinking vessel to have drunk, to have drunk at all. So, but then of course it also allows the relaxation of all inhibition and everything else that follows afterwards. So this is a female, and then we see her again here. And this, clearly they're playing some sort of a game with this, and the man is in fact offering her that very vessel that she'll be using in katabas, right there. So, but here she is, she's kind of sliding from her pillows, and then on the other side are men holding the same objects, and obviously this one has drunk his, and this one is almost drunk as well. So, I mean, these are the circumstances where we find a nude. There is a small terracotta doll, comes from the 5th century, and needless to say, no idealization there as well. I mean, looks in fact rather realistic. And she's got very small breasts, but the stomach is extended, and the muscles are not exercised. But this is it. This really is it for really the early period.
Great lecture, Mama. This is it. This is
No. I mean, but in terms of, in terms of, I mean, female nude is very rare, occurs very rarely. We're very lucky to have this, the Ludovici throne. It was probably an altar, we don't know. But here is the possible reconstruction of what may have looked like. It is in Rome, mid-5th century, whereas the doll, I think, is 5th century, probably the beginning of the century. But the throne is a Greek work, possibly produced in Sicily, because they're thinking Western Magna Grecia, so that which would be Sicily, and transported to Rome after the Romans. They conquered Sicily in the middle of the 3rd century BC, and that's when their fascination with all things Greek will begin, and then they will conquer Greece herself in the middle of the 2nd century. It may have belonged to the Aphrodite temple in that town, and the reason they think so is because of the decoration. And here, this is the first time when we actually see wet drapery. So Phidias was not entirely original. I mean, he was original in the forms of how he applied it, but the idea, we first see it here. So this is, there's an Aphrodite being helped from, helped up from a spring, having bathed. And then on this side there is a nude girl who is playing a flute, and on the other side is a matron. So what you see here, there's the Aphrodite, and there's the matron, and then on the other side is the girl. So this is the part. It's done in marble, and it's lovely. It's very, very beautiful. Granted, the breasts are probably a little too wide, and then if we judge the proportions of the Greek proportions that we talked about last time, actually, that the distance between the two breasts would have to be equal the distance between an underbreast and the navel, and then the same distance from the navel to the parting of the legs. This is not maintained here, clearly. I mean, this is, I don't know.
No, that's maintained, I think.
Is it maintained?
It looks like a perfect triangle.
Does it? Here.
It's the red, okay.
This is just the red?
Yeah, of your red, of your...
Oh.
It's maintained.
No, this is a little shorter. Yeah, this is too long. It's too much. Yeah. You see, this is not just the red, it's also about 3/4 of an inch.
Yeah.
No, they're not maintained. Because the distance between the bottom of the breast and the navel.
Coming to you live
Yeah.
on this YouTube channel.
Right. The measurements
We use Russian spoons to measure breasts.
Exactly.
Versus navels.
That's very true. So no, here the measurements are definitely not maintained. And we don't see where the legs begin. So, but here no. So the breasts are definitely too wide, and
Glad we got that cleared up.
yes, even by the Greek standards. But it's very beautiful.
Now
It's
we've
very
thoroughly
lovely.
breast-shamed Aphrodite.
I know, and she seems very happy. She's wearing this very light, kind of almost Egyptian sheath, and it's completely wet, so we see her body entirely. Now, as you remember back in the beginning of our lectures, when we talked about, it may have been in fact when we still were seeing one another, that the Greeks, of course, were looking at the Egyptians very much, and were adopting Egyptian conventions with their males, and well, ultimately with their females as well, but then will, of course, depart from them. Well, this looks quite Egyptian to me, again, in the idea of a transparent sheath, if nothing else. And then there are two women here One, so we don't know whether it's Aphrodite, but there was a temple of Aphrodite at that place, if this indeed comes from Sicily, and if it indeed comes from that town. So she's rising from the waves, dressed in a clinging robe, hair bound by a fillet. Probably the most famous piece from the Ludovisi throne, and Ludovisi, it's because it ended up in that family, and that's where we get the name. Clothes are wet, reveal the body. She's helped from the water by two women, we don't know fates, we don't know hours, standing on the pebble shore, you can see the pebble shore, who raise her up. The left one is wearing the Doric peplos, and the right one is wearing an Ionian chiton. Aphrodite, again, you probably remember from the lectures, who was born from the severed reproductive organ of Uranus that was cut off from his father by Kronos and fell into the waves, and the fertilization of the waves by Uranus's severed penis in fact engendered Aphrodite. So Aphrodite is born from the waves, as we will, as you know, the most famous image of that, of course, is Botticelli, and we'll look at it too in the process of this lecture. But this is the same idea. But again, it may not be Aphrodite, because we don't really know. The iconography, this particular iconography, is without a parallel in antiquity, so we're not sure. So alternative views are the emerging figure is that of the ritual robing of some goddess, maybe Persephone, rising from a cleft in the earth, or it could be Pandora, similarly shown, or Hera. I mean, we don't know. It looks very convenient to, and our minds always want to take the least difficult path, and Aphrodite just makes sense. But well, here she is, and then on the other side is Egel. This girl looks a little bit like our girl that's a handle to the mirror. She has small breasts. She's clearly quite young, and playing the flute, double flute. The probably the so-called hierodoulos, a slave serving in an ancient temple. Could be the temple of Aphrodite, but she is shown here sort of the same way as our nudes were shown on the vases. I mean, they're both reliefs. Neither of them is sculpture in the round. This one is a very, well, kind of medium relief, even though the hands and the arms of the two ladies are higher. The girl is in a higher relief, definitely. Again, concentrating on playing her flute, but she is in the nude, and but again, it's not Greece proper. It's Western Greece. It's Sicily, and thus we arrive at a very familiar to you image, and that is the Parthenon, and this is where we see. This is the reconstruction, of course, one of possible reconstructive drawings, and this is where we see Phidias employing that motif of the wet drapery to a great extent. You remember that the east pediment was much destroyed, so this is a reconstruction. Again, and our three goddesses here, they have much more clothes on them than did our Aphrodite, and we are now in the middle of the 5th century, so really a lot of clothes, but the clothes are done in such an extraordinary way and made to move around the bodies, and if anything, they actuate the bodies.
Accentuate.
They accentuate, yes, they accentuate the bodies. And as we talked about with the men, with male nudes, drapery is good. Drapery is very helpful, because drapery is it can express so much more in terms of movement, in terms of emotion, in terms of sensuality. I mean, anything and everything. Drapery is very, very helpful. And when drapery is not there, and you just have the nude body, it will take an effort to make it express as much as it does with the drapery. And even with the males, we saw that in many cases sculptors give them capes, because then the nude shows so much better against the cape, or the cape is flying in the wind, or the cape is draped around. It gives so much more to the sculpture. And these draperies, of course, give very much to these women. I mean, we see the bodies, we see beautiful, beautiful the breasts, and here they are. These three, presumably. This one is a little separate from the other two, and it's as if water is being poured over them, and they rejoice in its freshness and its sensuality, and the figures convey the pleasure. Here, and here's another one, also from the East Mediment, here as well, and the idea of water is very much there as well, while still keeping them quite dignified and proportionate, of course, and just outstanding in their position and in their place in the world. The one with drapery, I'm not sure that I showed it last time, I suppose I must have done, comes from the temple of Athena Nike. And this temple was an Ionic temple, so it had a frieze all around there above, and then also it had it has this parapet that was also decorated with reliefs. In fact, and these reliefs were much more obvious and larger, and could be seen much better. And while the frieze, it seems that was dedicated to various battles of Greeks with the Amazons, or Greeks with the giants, or centaurs. It seems that the parapet, in fact, was dedicated to the goddess Nike, the goddess of victory. And here's what it presumably looked like. And then as one walked up the steps here, as one walked up the step, here's the temple, and then the parapet you see going around. And then as one walked up, one could see it, and one could admire it. Here's the case. And the one delightful relief that comes from there is Nike tying up her sandals. Now, just so that you understand better about the wings, I mean, she does have wings, but they're not immediately seen on the original. This is a plaster cast, so you can see how the one wing is unfolded, the other one is folded, in fact, to keep her in balance while she is tying her sandal. You see the plastic cast, you can see much better. You can't see, I mean, here's the wing, but then you can't see that one very well. You see our three goddesses on the pantheon itself. They were full of dignity. They were full of relaxation, but also, would one call them sensual? Certainly not to the same extent as this one. Here, you literally see the garment dripping off the bosom. And the body is shown considerably more. Now the difference in age is about 30 years. The Pantheon, well, the Pantheon sculptures were done in the middle of the century, and this is already the end of the century. So 30, 40 years. And it was either someone who was young and was clearly helping, or was working under Phidias's direction on the Parthenon, or a student. But it's also clear that that many of the craftsmen who worked under Phidias's direction, they were familiar with the idea of web drapery, because it doesn't just spring out of nowhere. This proliferation of beauty and at the same time restraint and virtuosity with the carving, as is demonstrated here. And so our sculptor who did our Nike was clearly working among the sculptors, or he was a student of one of the sculptors. And then you remember this also this happened between the Parthenon sculptures and the sculptures and the Nike, and the Paionios, who was the sculptor of this Nike, he was commissioned by a couple of cities in Greece to place her in Olympia, near the temple of Zeus in Olympia, because there had just been a victory over Spartans, and to commemorate that victory, this Nike was commissioned. And this web drapery, they're going with it, and you see it here how her wings are lost, but the wings are flattering, and the drapery is behind her, and the wind clings the drapery against the body. So it's that same wet drapery that shows her body, but at the same time gives so much expression to the whole sculpture. She's just touching the ground as we are looking at her, and in fact one of her breasts is uncovered. So the time has come not just to show the breast essentially uncovered, but behind the wet drapery. But in fact, one breast is now uncovered. And goodness, I mean, this must have happened all the time, because in real life, as we have it today as well, when women need to feed their children, they uncover a breast. Obviously, this wasn't done in the Greek society in the open, but nevertheless, I mean, at home, of course, this happened. So the whole idea of a woman uncovering her breast was just the part of life. And now we arrive. It's past the middle of the 4th century. Alexander is doing his battles, and we have, that's the first female nude that we have in the round, and also adhering to certain canon of proportion. And because it's that same Praxiteles, remember Hermes? And even here you see the difference between, well, obviously this is a copy, and the art historians of course bemoan the fact that we don't have the original, which is why so many of them back in the 20th century were hoping that this was the original. By the way, Sasha managed to get rid of the Hermes, you see, had the same connection between the body, and he does, in fact, between the body and the support that was obviously, of course, installed later for the body to not to fall apart.
Well, no, not installed later, just made with this copy.
But you see, if they the 20th century art historians felt that it was not a copy, that it was the original.
Right, but I'm saying that.
Oh, this, yes, definitely. This
no,
was
but I'm just trying to clarify that this edition, that this piece linking the body to the vase was already there. It was not installed later. It was done with the copy. It was.
Oh, this was done with the copy. Yes.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. It was not.
But I think if this one is the original, then it was installed later.
Okay.
Because they wouldn't do it.
Okay.
He wouldn't have this. It's just so unorganic.
Okay.
You see, that's what I'm trying to say.
I see.
Which is why I asked you to remove it, because it just doesn't look right. But it does have it, however. So it's the same sculptor who was the first to do the female body, and I assure you that this measurement here between the breasts and this, that all works out. Why he did it, who gave him the idea, we don't know. But it's the same idea that we had just seen from of Aphrodite from the Ludovisi throne, that she's just either came out of the water or she's about to go back into the water, because she has her chlamys, her garment is next to her on the vase, which of course is also serving as a support for the sculpture. And we talked about the fact that bronze sculptures don't really need an extra support because they're not as heavy, so they could in fact be attached to their base and live there. Whereas this is not the case with the marble sculptures, because they may still flip over. Also, there's no question that there was such a thing as bronze female nude also, but we just don't have any. This is probably the best copy, one feels, but there's so many, because all Romans wanted to have a copy of this, which is why there's so much, there's this huge question mark about Hermes of Praxiteles, because there's just no copies, and it is so spectacular. It's such a spectacular sculpture that one would think that the Romans would want copies of that as well, just as they wanted the copies of the Doryphorus. But back then, you see, back in the 20th century and earlier and before in the 19th century, and until really modern day, the best dating source they had was the writings of travelers who would talk about sculptures that they saw, who would talk about what was famous, what was really remarkable, and reading these. I mean, that's how they figured out that Laocoon was Laocoon, because Pliny writes about him. So very many of these statues were dated by that fact, whereas today, because you see, you can't do carbon 14 on these. This is stone, so it's today they try to do this stylistic method more so, but again, even stylistically, he's just gorgeous. So as I showed you before, she was meant for a temple, and on the island of Knidos, and was the round temple. Here, the temple was round temple. She would be sitting in, looking out, and she was the wonder of the world. She, in her case, there's no question. There's so many travelers who talk about her and who describe her, and she was just a wonderment, presumably. And then after her, we saw she was just repeated over and over and over again. And really, the next female nude that of great significance, and presumably also by Praxiteles, that Praxiteles did the original one. This one, this comes from, we don't know. You see, they have 100 years between 131 or 40, but the fact is no one really knows, because, I mean, obviously she's from a Hellenistic period. Even though originally when she was uncovered, there was she's done in such a classical manner. The face, the proportions, because proportions will change. That the first idea was that she was indeed classical. Well, she's not, because even this suggestive slipping of the garments recommends more of a titillation than the 5th century would allow itself. Whereas you see, her left in our original Canadian, her left arm is supporting her body, whereas her right arm sort of attempts to cover her neither region, while she's unaware of us entirely. So she's, I mean, the original must have been quite spectacular. She just is completely in her own world. What if indeed Praxiteles came up with the idea, which is possible, the idea of a base, instead of having two legs, which of course are not very stable in a marble sculpture, instead of having that, he essentially decided to put a torso on the base. But the base now he created as drapery, so it looks both as drapery, very natural, but also serves as a base, so no extra supports are needed. And that was actually an ingenious idea. Her shoulder is slightly higher, as you see, than the Canadian, and also the head, the axis of the head follows the axis of the chest, whereas in the Canadian there's more of a wave, but the arch of the body is rather similar. Her left leg is projecting more, and it's possible that the left arm, which is, you see, is closer to the body. It's possible that the idea was the same. Not the left arm, the right arm. The idea was the same, but that she, with that gesture, was in fact holding up her garment and preventing it from slipping. She lives in the Louvre, but her face is just such a classical face that it's very easy, of course, to confuse her with the classical sculpture. The Capitoline Venus that was discovered on the Capitoline was all the rage in the 18th century, as far as that. But 16th century into the 18th, once she was discovered. She, of course, is based on our Aphrodite of Cnidos. She comes from. They feel that it is an Antonine copy, which would be 2nd century AD, of something that was created before. And things have changed considerably here. Well, for one thing, as you see, both arms are now functional. The arms were functional before, but functional in a very different way. Now she's covering herself not with the right arm, but with the left arm, while pretending, sort of pretending, to cover the breasts, but in fact emphasizing them. Well, Kenneth Clark feels that there's a great deal of self-consciousness about this one, which is not the case with the other one. I must tell you that the world was quite enamored of the Capitoline Venus. She is standing directly next to the support, and as such doesn't need the connection. Her breasts, as you see, are much closer now. These breasts are much farther apart than these breasts. And I haven't measured her, but the others, she was the one very famous copy of the of our Aphrodite. And then the next one was the so-called Medici Venus, that also, you see, she was put together of different pieces, and she in particular was one of the most greatly copied antiquities. Louis XIV had 5 of those. Now the breasts move farther apart, as you see here. The head becomes smaller. This head is larger than this head, but then we don't exactly know whether this head was the original in the first place. I think this arm was in fact restored, so we don't know what the original was, but it seems to create more of an angle with the body, and the hand itself looks a little too elegant for just wanting to cover herself. I mean, it's a very elegant hand. Even this one is not nearly as elegant, and but nevertheless, it was the same thing as with the Capitoline Venus. These were goddesses of from Renaissance on. Unlike the Cnidian, again, the head is turned on a different axis than the body, sort of engaging the outside world, it seems. This is an 18th century painting, which is in the English Royal Collections, and the gallery, the Tribuna in Uffizi, is a very large room where all the greatest paintings and sculptures were collected. And in the 18th century, we may have talked about it was well, not as many people, of course, went there. Only the connoisseurs and the wealthy who could afford to travel and to do the grand tour. But here you see there's our Medici Venus, and these are our the 2 wrestlers right here. There's a Raphael and another Raphael, and the Titian, of course, and there's a Titian here as well. There's a Rubens, and there's the Etruscan Chimera. So this is the world of art that was so important to the connoisseurs. And there's our Medici Venus, of course. And you see all these men standing around just admiring her. This is a portrait of one of those connoisseurs. Well, the greatest was someone by the name of Winkelmann, who also admired the Medici Venus. And here he has a miniature bronze. They all love miniature bronzes, and the miniature bronzes exist today. So there's a copy of the Medici Venus, and he is holding in his hand, you see, he is holding a measuring instrument. deducing the ideal proportions on the statues, on the statue. And he wrote. He's the author of The Art of Painting, right there. And but all these men just breathed these nudes. They lived these nudes. They loved them. And by now, you see, when we think a nude, we immediately think a female nude today. But you see, in Greece, it wasn't the case at all. To an ancient, to classical Greek mind, a nude was a male nude, and which is why we have such dearth of the actual nudes. There's another copy, and she's called Venus of Arc, and because that's where she was found. Another Hellenistic idea of the Cnidian Aphrodite, except she really was restored out of her life. She's in the Louvre. Again, they're figuring maybe she was also done by Praxiteles originally, and Thespia is one of the Graces, and we'll talk about the Graces presently, because obviously Praxiteles could not have just done one Cnidian and then not do something similar. So he must have. So which is why one thinks that Venus de Milo in the Louvre and this one in the Louvre, that they also were originally Praxitelan ideas. But she, unfortunately, you see, in the 2nd century AD, Pausanias mentions the existence of a sculpture in central Greece, of a group, in fact, made of Cupid, Phryne, and Aphrodite. Phryne was the muse of Praxiteles, and perhaps ultimately his wife, but certainly Hetera, probably at first. And the group of 3, as we will see presently, will also be very popular as the 3 Graces. But then you see Louis XIV again. He asked François Girardot, who was a royal sculptor, he asked, well, to change her, well, to restore her. So as you see, all of this the sculptor did. He added the kind of silly neck. I mean, this is all restored. And even the surface itself is smooth. And, well, as a result, she looks slightly dead. But,
Yeah.
she has the same idea, you see, as the Venus de Milo, with the base, with her cloak supporting her body, which is why one feels that perhaps it was still Praxiteles. I can imagine that when she was real. So the apple was given to her again by Girardot, because well, she's Aphrodite, so she won the apple from Paris, and that's why it's here. And here you have them. This is what we have. They're all 4 of them are Roman copies. We don't have, I mean, we're so lucky with males, because at least those bronzes were found, the 2 in Riaci, and then our Zeus was also found at the sea level, at the bottom of the sea. So and those, I mean, we don't know by whom, but they are excellent, beautiful, original statues, bronze statues. And we even so lucky as to have Hermes, whether he is Praxitelan or not, he is astonishing, and he does give us an idea of what those originals looked like. We have absolutely none of it with the females. In fact, we have a better idea with the females from the Renaissance and the Baroque sculptures, because and even in art, in in paintings, because what the artists tried to do was in fact to recreate what might have been, because this is basically what we have today. But we're happy for that. We're certainly happy for that. But you can see how it all began with her, and then things began. This one is just completely opened up. The Venus of Arles. She's not trying to, well, she doesn't need to hide her nether region because she has. Oh, I didn't include the Venus de Milo, but I should have included her as well. But she's not trying to cover her breasts. These two, the Capitoline and the Medici, are attempting to cover themselves. And then the Cnidian is, yeah, she's probably the most dignified of them all, in a way. Now Phryne, we mentioned Phryne from Praxiteles, sculpted, because the achievement was not just Praxiteles', the achievement was also Phryne's, his models. And this is a beautiful painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme of Phryne. You probably heard of Phryne from Phryne Fisher episodes, which are delightful. The name is the same. She was so beautiful, so everyone says. She was so incredibly beautiful that she was accused of unchastity, and she was brought, in fact, before the Areopagon, which was the Council of the Elders. But her attorney, whose name is known actually, presumably what he did, instead of even speaking, he lifted her chlamys, he exposed her naked before these elderly men, just to show that, I mean, she couldn't help herself. She is what she is, and she's so admirable and so spectacular that the men simply can't help themselves. Didn't you tell me the story that what was it? Oh, it's Jesus. It's Jesus that then go tear your eyes out.
Oh yeah, the story that the two men came to Jesus and said that, oh, this woman, she's so beautiful. Surely because she is so beautiful, that makes her a temptress and therefore a creature of sin, and therefore how should we not punish her? And Jesus' response was, if she's so beautiful and that is how God made her, then rather pluck your eyes out than
Right.
Then I mean, look to your own sin, not to hers.
So true.
I mean, she
Yeah.
happens to be beautiful. You happen to be awful.
Well, and that's what Jerome painted here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these men are certainly not about to pluck their eyes out. There's a bunch of dirty old men, and their expressions are almost as precious, or as precious, as the beauty of the body. And of course, Jerome, what he does here, he does exactly what the sculptors or Praxiteles did. He reduces her to whatever the body was. He reduces the body to just beautiful, perfect proportion, and to a sculpture. She looks here as a sculpture. That's another slide I wanted to put also by Jerome of Pygmalion, the story of Pygmalion who was an ancient sculptor, who was essentially a Praxiteles, and who created such a spectacular, beautiful nude I mean, it's quite a philosophical story that no mortal female could compare. And yes, no mortal female could compare. I mean, Phryne clearly was very, very beautiful, but otherwise, as with male ideal nudes and female ideal nudes, you reduce the body to perfection. And so Pygmalion saw it, and he knew he could never find a woman like this, and then asked the gods to bring her to life, which they did. So this is sort of the same idea. These are the two nudes that actually Lord Clark felt talk of wishful thinking, and I mean the man knew what he was talking about, but he felt they came from the 5th century as opposed to the 4th century. Today, it is very much felt that they were in fact a 1st century A.D. Roman copy. It is a similar figure. It is a figure of a girl here, there. Lawrence Albertadema, another brilliant painter of the 19th century, copied. She's called the Esquiline Venus because that's where she was found. He copied her in the process, you see, of tying up her hair, because this presumably is what she's doing. And another painter, Edward Poynter, did the same thing, more in the Near Eastern attitude than she is here. So as you see, the shoulders are raised very similarly, and the left leg is slightly projected. The head again is turned away, but basically same thing. They are continuation of the same idea. So he was hoping that was from the 5th century. He was also hoping that this thing came from the 5th century as well, because she's a bronze, and she's an antique bronze. She's small, actually, she's not big. 24 centimeters, yeah, like this. So she's a miniature bronze, and again, he felt that she comes from the 5th century BC, and which of course is indicative of the fact that then there must have been other nudes and female nudes, and certainly in the 4th century, that were done in bronze, which probably is the case. It's just we don't have any. She lives in Munich, and her back, for some reason, is better preserved than her front. She was found in Beroia in Macedonia, and today the specialists feel that she dates to about 100 BC, not to the 5th century. And we saw, of course, how else the Aphrodite of Cnidos was employed in considerably less dignified and manner. The same body will, of course, be vulgarized because, well, the first Bible was called the Vulgate because essentially it was for the population at large, and vulgaris, which I mean, it didn't have the connotation, the pejorative connotation it has today, and the Vulgate because so it was not written either in brilliant Greek or in brilliant, oh no, well, Hebrew is different. In brilliant Greek or later in brilliant Latin. On the contrary, they were when it was translated, when the New Testament was translated from Koine, which was kind of vulgar Greek, it was translated into vulgar Latin so that the population at large could understand it, or at least understand what their priests read to them, because obviously people couldn't read. But then the priests weren't particularly educated either. So the taste or of population at large does not, obviously, well, first of all, it's not trained, and it doesn't aspire to the heights of the Phidias or Hermes or Praxiteles. And they're considerably more amused and pleased by something that is closer to their understanding, and this, of course, is closer. It's the same idea. The arms are changed, but she is hitting. This is Aphrodite, and the god. Well, he's a follower of Dionysus. He's a satyr, Pan, and often sometimes they're portrayed with the. I forget the difference between a Pan and a satyr. There are all sorts, and this one has the legs of a goat, and Eros is caressing one of his horns, while Aphrodite is very playingly, very coquettishly, in fact, she has taken off one of her shoes and is beating him off with it. But so the difference between the divine and the vulgar. Also, you and I mean, we saw another Roman copy of a Hellenistic original, where crouching Aphrodite is being used, and we'll look at her as well. And an interesting, and as I said, from Renaissance on, the sculptors, the artists, tried to repeat the ideas of the Greeks, and this the Clodion, an 18th century sculptor, who does sort of the same thing. Who repeats this very popular theme of satyrs and nymphs, because I mean that's what the whole idea of the Dionysiac religion and followers was, that he was the god of wine, he was the god of procreation, he was the god of merriment, joy, copulation, all of that, and this was sort of a convenient way to give divine respectability to an act of pornography. So these were very popular statues. This one comes from the 18th century, even though it could very easily have been carved back in the Hellenistic period, and thus we arrive at the crouching Aphrodite, who also is she comes from the 2nd century BC. We have no idea who the sculptor is. She is delightful. We looked at it before, that she there's a prototype that was done in the 4th century, again on a vase, as you see, and now this prototype found its expression in the sculpture in the round, and it's a very delightful sculpture in the round. I mean, you feel the beautiful weight, you feel the beautiful body, and the corkscrew, the way the body turns, and this body definitely is meant to be looked at from every perspective, because when we think of our male nudes, so many of them were just frontal, and they were meant to be looked at frontally. I mean, technically, Aphrodite of Cnidos was meant to be looked at frontally. However, there was another door in the temple that could be opened from the other side, and there's a record of 2 visitors who gave the men in charge, who bribed the men in charge, who opened that door for them, and that they admired that aspect of Aphrodite as well. And as we know, in painting in the future, the female back will be just as important as the female front. But here there's no question of back front, just she's meant to be looked at and admired from every direction. This is now Gian Bologna, who was in fact not even Italian. I mean, he lived in Italy, but he was from Flanders. And speaking of the corkscrew, he was just a brilliant sculptor. And here is the perennial theme of the rape of the Sabine women, in which case, and here is now he unites male and female together in one sculpture. And this sculpture also is meant to be looked at everywhere, from every direction, because not just from one direction. It's so spectacular. I mean, here are these male nudes, and they form a base for the spectacular female, and the whole thing just goes round and round and round. And the man was astonishing. And you see here as the two, the male nude and the female, are united, which of course all sorts of abductions allowed sculptors to do this sort of thing. The theme, of course, is strictly Roman, because the abduction of the Sabine women. But the idea of abduction is very Greek, because every kind of abduction happens in Greek myths, and they must have sculpted it, they must have painted it. It's just that we have nothing, absolutely nothing, to show for it. And speaking of the unification of a male and a female, this sculpture is in the Borghese Gallery. There's also another one in the Louvre. There are a number of these, and it's called the Sleeping Hermaphrodite. Hermaphroditus.
Just hermaphrodite. It's the child of Hermes and Aphrodite. I think it's just hermaphrodite by itself.
Hermaphrodite?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, according to some legends, he was once a handsome youth who attracted the love of a naiad. A naiad is a water nymph. And she prayed to be united with him forever. So the gods, answering her prayer, united them. And as such, the person became female and male at the same time. Now,
and the name comes from the combination of Aphrodite and Hermes.
And Hermes.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Hermaphrodite. Yeah, thank you. Bernini, in the 17th century, will sculpt the pillow and the mattress, but the sculpture itself does. Yeah, but the sculpture in fact comes from mid-2nd century, and you can see
it's pretty incongruous, the pillow and the. I mean, it's cute. It just looks much more modern than.
Right. Oh, it works together, and she must sleep on something, right? Interesting, because 100 years ago, when I first came to the Borghese, this sculpture was just in the middle of the room. I could walk around, and and I watched many an American tourist, a male American tourist, would have this expected smile on their faces so long as they were watching, as they were looking at this beautiful bag, speaking of bags, and as they would walk around, the smile would disappear from their face, which was very, very funny. The very last time, Sashka, I think we were there, it was moved to the wall, so there was absolutely no way to see this aspect of the hermaphrodite.
Which was so weird.
Right?
It was so small-minded and weird in a way. I mean,
they must have complained to
someone. Yeah, but it was such a weird censorship of art.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, of sort of the ancient perspective on gender, because the combination of two genders was always seen as sort of enlightened. I mean, Happy, the god.
The gods originally, presumably. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's Happy, the god of the Nile. Literally the source giver of the most ancient culture was both male and female in body. So it's just a weird modern thing to be like, no.
Yeah, Puritan.
Yeah, Puritan is the word for it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but it's so very much moved to the wall.
Very weird.
You can't even peek.
Right. No, I remember.
I mean, they made. Remember we tried to
remember.
Peek. You can't even peek. It's very resolutely moved to the wall.
Yeah, it's a weird censorship.
I wonder if they did. I don't know if the Italians did it in the Louvre. Who knows? Okay. Then last time we talked about ecstasy, and we saw one image, one relief. Ecstasy usually has to do with the Dionysiac rites, and again the unification of male and female in ecstasy. But we have quite a number of these reliefs of women, again, where their garments help them very much intact. They very much aid the whole idea of dancing and enjoying and moving through space. And these are, during this, often they're called Menads, and again, satyrs or Pan. They were the followers of Dionysus. The Menads portrayed as inspired by Dionysus' state of ecstatic frenzy, combination of dancing and intoxication, but we saw this already in the 6th century in the vase, remember. During these rites, the Menads would dress in fawn skins and carry a thyrsus, a long stick wrapped in ivy or vine leaves and tipped with a pine coin. They would weave ivy wreaths around their heads or wear a bull helmet in honor of their god, and often handle or wear snakes. So of these we have quite a number, fortunately. And thus we arrive at this one group that became extremely popular, and we don't really have it from the classical age, whether dressed or undressed. And it's the group of the three graces. And again, and for some reason, as time went on, it was all right for the three graces to be undressed, while other female nudes sometimes acquire the fig leaf or whatever. The idea perhaps came from the dancing, and today in Greece, one goes in the countryside, one can still see the dancing together with the arms placed on other dancers' shoulders. And somebody had this fortunate idea of just removing these three from the circle and depicting them just by themselves. And except that for the most part they're stationary. They don't dance. This particular one, this is Greco-Roman, so it could be anything. And Greco-Roman could be from 2nd century to 2nd century BC to AD. But they live, you see, in this spectacular, in Siena, in Piccolo Mini Library, where Pinturicchio in the 15th century did. In fact, very early 16th century. Sorry, the Pope Pius II, who lived in the 15th century, his nephew then commissioned Pinturicchio to do his life in these spectacular frescoes, and that's where our graces live as well. As you see, they are not in a great shape, and the middle one is missing a head. But in a case like this of course is very convenient because you can study a female body from the back and from the front. It's almost Picasso. He will do that too. You don't have to go around. They're right there. Here are another three graces. These come from the fresco in Pompeii, in Herculaneum. And the group, and so the three graces were a group of, there are all sorts of stories where they come from, and there are many traditions. So the group of minor goddesses, part of Aphrodite's retinue, presumably, consists of Euphrosyne, which is joy, Thalia, bloom, and Aglaia, elegance or brightness. And the reason I'm spitting out these words again so easily is because both Euphrosyne and Aglaia are not Thalia though, are very, very they're very Russian names, and they were particularly from old Russia, but I think they're coming back in fashion as things like this do. So together they personify grace, beauty, charm. The cult is very old, and it might be sort of from Pelagian, from pre-Greek origin. It may also come from the Near Eastern origin. It has Near Eastern origin. Well, we don't know. The purpose of the cult appears to be similar to that of nymphs, primarily based around fertility, nature, particular connection to springs and rivers. But they usually are represented stationary, as I said, and not dancing. And thus we jump back into the Renaissance, because you see a female nude will kind of will go into a deep sleep for a long time, for 1,000 years, because with the advance of Christianity, all sorts of nudity was of course prohibited, and then the arts were lost, and the ability was lost, and so she went into a deep coma, and the fortunate and the prince who woke up our sleeping beauty, in fact, his name was Sandro Botticelli, from Florence, and he was very fortunate in being part of the Neoplatonic Academy that was established under Cosimo de' Medici and then continued by his son Lorenzo, and that was, there was nothing, it was not an official body, it was just a group of extremely intelligent, extremely well-learned men who were utterly beguiled by the classical civilization, and were very much intent on reviving that civilization, and wrote poetry, wrote treatises, and Botticelli, as Michelangelo will also, were part of the group, and and here he paints his Primavera, which to an extent is still somewhat late medieval, with the exception of these three graces here. Well, the men, Poliziano and Marsilio Ficino, were the two leading geniuses of the group, members of the Lorenzo de' Medici circle, and they probably, not may have, they probably influenced the painting, and Botticelli, in fact, painted some of their poetry. So another inspiration, which also comes from Lucretius, which these men read avidly. Lucretius had just been discovered. Seems to have been a poem by Lucretius on the nature of things, and that included these lines: springtime and Venus come, and Venus's boy, the winged harbinger, steps on before, and hard on Zephyr's footprints. Mother Flora, sprinkling the ways before them, fills all with colors and with odors excellent. We're not going to go through the painting now because, as I said, this is we're trying to concentrate on the female nude. So there's Botticelli. He, 1,000 years later, he brings them back, and he brings them back dancing, not stationary, but in fact dancing. And what are they wearing? They're wearing these diaphanous garments that remind us of what? Of wet drapery, definitely. And there's that wind that clings the drapery around them. They were, well, yes, the Graces, in other theories, that they were daughters of Zeus and Hera, and their raison d'etre was pleasure. They were goddess of play, happiness, relaxation. Associated with the Muses, attendants of Aphrodite, and also lived on Mount Olympus. But this is what you see. You have these beautiful bodies, completely revived from the back, from the front, in diaphanous clothes, and the faces. In fact, the faces could very easily be of real women. In fact, in the Netflix series, the Borgia, the Alexander VI mistress, the actress looks very much like this. Like
the actress who plays Giulia Farnese?
Giulia Farnese, yeah. Yeah, I think she's Dutch, yeah. She looks like these girls. I mean, also of course they gave her the, but she looks like them. And so Botticelli revived our three graces, which is lovely. And then Raphael was not far behind. And if anybody loved women, Raphael did, unlike Leonardo or Michelangelo. But Raphael very much did. In fact, it seems that the inspiration for his three graces came from that Piccolomini library, from the Sienese group. And here he gives them, in fact, golden apples, sort of like the ones, the golden apple that Aphrodite won in the first place. And indeed, if they are followers of Aphrodite, then it pertains to them to have a golden apple. Here he makes, I mean, Botticelli made them dance, but Raphael was very classical, which Botticelli was not. And so he placed them where they belonged, and made them stationary as well. But again, a brilliant way to study a woman's form from the front and from the back at the same time. Another revival, brilliant revival, again by Botticelli, going back to Botticelli, is our Aphrodite as she comes out of the waters. We began with the Ludovisi throne, and then we saw, and then, well, this is the Medici Venus, and then the Cnidian, and then of course the Medici, the Capitoline. And what Raphael does, Botticelli, he in fact repeats the Medici Venus, and he even repeats the proportion. The only thing that, and yet she doesn't look substantial. And the reason she doesn't look substantial is because he gives her absolutely no weight. She is floating. Because obviously she cannot stand on a shell like this without the shell flipping over. So she is floating. She is celestial. I'm sure Lord Clark would agree with that. But the proportions are very much there, and her pose, but her pose is that of the Medici Venus. He will use her again. Actually, in fact, both the let me go back. The Birth of Venus and the next one we'll see the painting. They were presumably painted by Apelles, who was a painter in the very famous painter back in the 4th century BC. We have absolutely nothing from him, but it seems again that the Neoplatonic Academy, that Botticelli was encouraged to try and recreate the Apelles' painting, because that's what they tried to do, and here it is. And here's this in fact is called the Colony of Apelles, because presumably again Apelles painted something like this as well. And the calumny meaning that the poor soul is accused, is calumniated upon, is accused of wrongdoing, which he didn't do. But then, of course, how it can destroy a woman's life. And so truth, he chooses the same form to depict the truth, and then the other allegories that are more treachery, etc. But it's the truth that interests Nana. And here it is, it's the same thing. So we go back to that same sculpture. I'm not sure, we should check whether the breasts go in that direction if you raise an arm. I don't think so. But, well, Botticelli made them right. So this probably doesn't go with the perfect proportion. But she does. Well, even the truth doesn't have much weight, as she points to heavens seeking justice. And then our next beautiful nude is same thing. She's got her left hand there. She's hiding her neither region, and the other arm is up, except she's lying down now. And the painter who conceived her now is Giorgione. And I mean, the model is the same, you see. That's what makes it so fascinating, that the model is still there. But while Giorgione's Venus here, while his Venus could probably be called celestial, on the other hand, Titian's, Titian is painting this. He's borrowing Giorgione's brilliant innovation, and he made it his own very much. Except Titian's Venus is very much earthy rather than celestial. This could be I suppose compared to the Cnidian, where she's not aware of anybody observing her and is very much in her own beautiful world, whereas with the Venus of Urbino, she's very much aware, and she's now in a beautiful palace, and of course Titian was receiving commissions from dukes and princes, and they wanted their females to be aware of them. So, and Titian very much complied with that. But the difference between them, I suppose, would be as between the Cnidian, say, and the Medici Venus. And here we have the difference between Giorgione and the Titian Venus. Titian also used her in this gorgeous nude in his Bacchanal of the Adrians. And here we're back to ecstasy, and because here he paints very much the Dionysiac festival, the Dionysiac rite, and where everybody's drinking, and there's someone passed out up there, but in front of it all lies this spectacular nude, whether she's dreaming of it, whether she's just she fell asleep in this very uncomfortable pose, but there she is, and the little boy, who, if only he had little wings, could be her son, but at the moment he's just peeing the excess wine that he's peeing it out. But the nude is spectacular. In this case, she's hiding nothing. She is just lying there, but very different, however, from Giorgione. Even though the Giorgione one is sleeping as well, her dreams are this spectacular background. She's part of this whole ideal landscape, whereas this one, of course, is part of this. And then Titian went a little farther. This is by now he was about 80 years old, and so he's using the same nude essentially, but he's opening her even more. She of course doesn't. She's lying there in all her beauty, and here she's being abducted again by Zeus. And he even gives her wet drapery, which is kind of interesting because she's completely opened up. She's ready to procreate the European race, and yet at the same time he gives her the wet drapery in this very interesting return to the pre-nude convention. I think the best painters of the nude, really, among the old masters. Well, Titian, of course, and then the Rubens, obviously. And Rubens he was another happy man. He unfortunately did not live as long as Titian. Titian lived, whatever, 100. Rubens, I think, will die in his early 60s, maybe even late 50s. No, probably early 60s, because I think when he was 55, 56, he married Hélène Fournier, who was 16. She was about 40 years younger than him. But loved her. Just couldn't paint her enough. As Titian was, he was extremely successful, extremely wealthy, a friend of dukes and princes and kings, and he paints his own version, you see, of the Medici Venus, except this is well, today's Antwerp, today's Belgium, so it's cold there. You can't just do with the chlamys, or as the Canadian did, or with just a little robe. You have to have a fur, because it's really very, very close, very, very cold. But the way she's holding the fur around her, and she looks at him with such incredible love and affection. I mean, he clearly was so good to her and loved her so very much, and it's such an intimate painting. I mean, I suppose Canadian is somewhat intimate, but and she was placed in a temple, but she could be observed, of course. Whereas this one was a very intimate painting. It was just painted for the two of them, and he did not want it in any museums, and he didn't want anyone else possessing it, and he very specifically left it to her. It was only after her death that she went elsewhere. It is in Vienna. It is in Vienna today. He, in his letter, he called it Little Fur. But the way her left arm, her left hand, you see, is holding this white garment, and also the fur. Everything is beautiful, and the fur, of course, is embroidered in gold thread. I mean, there was nothing that this young woman wanted that her beloved, her husband, beloved and in love, would deny her. And so neither region is closed, but with her right hand, if anything, she brings her breasts up and makes them and perks them up, and as I said, and love, and looks at him with such just endless love. Beautiful painting, but again, it's based on our Greek examples. And this, of course, is, and this is she again, on the left, and she was beautiful. And the thing with Rubens is that, yes, he loved female flesh, and he did not reduce anything. He just loved, loved, loved with such sincere appreciation. There's absolutely nothing untoward about it. It's, and again, the little clock talks about it, and he's right. It almost seems as if he uses female flesh and all the puckers and all the wrinkles and all the folds, sort of like Phidias, sort of as Phidias used the wet drapery. This flesh follows the woman and embraces her and gives her happiness and warmth and joy, and that's how he paints them. I love it. I love Rubens. I know very many don't like his idea of a woman. I think it's fabulous. And so, and this is she. This is Helene. And Helene here, Helene Formet, painted shortly after his marriage to her, bears witness to artist's happiness, which is visible in the sensuality of his paintings from that moment forward. Belonged to the artist until his death again, and dead acquired by Philip IV, and it's in Spain now. Another thing that Rubens did, speaking of, because loved female, he copied a painting by Michelangelo that today is lost, which is very unfortunate. But Michelangelo, in his interesting, because Michelangelo very rarely painted a female flesh. And when he did, it wasn't a female flesh, it was a male flesh that he painted, or carved for that matter. But Michelangelo loved this attitude. He invented it, it seems, with Leda and the swan. The swan again is Zeus, and Leda is a mortal maiden, and comes to her. And then Michelangelo will use this particular attitude in the sculpture, his sculpture of day, I think, or of the night, of the day.
This was one of the opening slides to the Trojan War.
Oh,
lecture.
right, of
Yeah.
course. Oh, yes.
Yeah, so
Absolutely,
you
because
guys have seen this one before.
okay, right. So you must have seen it before. Of course,
Yeah.
you saw it before, because yes, of course, because she births the two
Helen.
twins.
Helen.
And Helen. She births Helen,
And played of Nestor,
but also Castor and Pollux.
but also Castor and Pollux.
Because Rubens, you see, he copies the painting, and then he uses the same pose. This is our Castor and Pollux, and again they're abducting someone. And but this Rubens here does a little bit what John Bologna does. He does first of all he studies the woman from the front and from the back, and then here the Castor and Pollux. Which one of them is mortal? Which
I
one?
don't remember. I
don't
think.
right.
Yeah, I don't remember.
But I think the one who is mortal is the one who is
I always get them confused.
who is wearing the armor.
I want
Whatever.
to say Castor.
So the rape of the daughters of Lysippus, and here too, it seems that he may have Helen in mind because she's this blonde beauty, and so the female nude is now given this incredible, beautiful, glorious injection by Titian and then by Rubens, Raphael of course as well. And then we saw, I think we saw it in another class, Bernini, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who was a 17th century brilliant sculptor, and again of course looked at antique models, what he could do, and Gian Bologna as well in trying to unite male and female nudes. And this is the rape of Proserpine, and these are the different aspects, and this too is meant to be walked around. I mean, as I said, certain sculptures.
Castor was mortal.
Castor was mortal?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. That means this is Castor and this is Pollux.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because he wasn't afraid of anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's when Castor is given the death blow that Pollux basically has a choice. He can either let his brother die and himself sort of progress to Olympus and be a god, or he can split half of his immortality with his brother, and then they both become star constellations.
And they did.
And he chose to save his brother's life.
That's wonderful. Okay.
Maybe we can feel sympathy for them when they aren't in the middle of abducting women.
Maybe.
Yeah, okay. Moving on.
Okay. And here, the incredible ability. Did the ancients know how to do it? Probably. But, well, we have no proof. But fortunately, we have had Renaissance and Baroque to recreate what the ancients hopefully had done. Same in painting, moving on to Anger, who was a 19th century neoclassicist, and he is using our Aphrodite of Cnidos to do two paintings 10 years apart. This is again the Venus Anadyomene. That means Aphrodite means coming from the waves. In fact, the word Aphrodite means Aphros. Aphros meant the waves in Greek, probably still does, and well, Africa is the land beyond the waves. And the Aphrodite is the woman who came out of the waves. So Anadyomene in Latin is the same thing as Aphrodite, coming out of the waves, and he has turned her around. She is now, her weight now is on the left leg rather than on the right leg, and the arc of her body is the other way. But the basic idea is still. Nobody will be able to. No artist, no matter how modern, will be able to separate themselves from that image. And here we arrive at well, Titian, as I said, Titian created the our the Medici Venus lying down, and Manet takes it a step further. He just he goes back to he essentially goes back to that Kilix that we saw in the very beginning with the porno, with the woman who is who's playing katabas with her wine with her wine vessel. So we've come a whole round, a whole circle, excuse me, to the same thing. I should have put that one here too. Just as the one who played the katabas was a porno, so is this one, and he uses this old master's idea of the reclining female that Giorgione established, except in this case, the way she covers her nether region is with determination, not hiding it. The whole idea is she's looking at a male who came for services, and she essentially tells him, money first. This is not my source of power, as it was in ancient world. This is my source of income, which is why this society, contemporaneous society, was in such uproar, because that society went to public houses all the time, but it wasn't talked about. Whereas here, Manet essentially threw it into their face, the fact he made them aware of the conditions under which they usually see a nude woman.
It's interesting how the only time people are really, or at least the society felt comfortable seeing nudes, was when it was not at the not with the control or at the behest of the nude. Like the only two times you really see nudes is you have come upon a woman who was not expecting you and she's desperately trying to cover herself, and that is very sexy. Or this woman is being abducted and about to be horribly raped, and that is now on this canvas. I mean, the few times that you have a woman asserting her own, basically, ownership of herself, it's either as a joke, as with that Aphrodite who is like about to smack this satyr away, but she's having a good time and she's totally in control. And you know,
also the Menads are completely in control.
She's a goddess. She knows what she's doing. But alternatively, you have these very creepy scenes where you have the satyrs clawing and grasping at the nymphs, and they can't get away. And you just think, oh yes, welcome to my entrance hall. Here is a completely normal thing next to the fruit salad. You know, why not? Would you like a cheese plate? Please sit down.
Grapes.
Whatever. And it's kind of interesting how whenever you have everyone, we were having this lecture about the female nude, but the only time that the audience was comfortable with the nude was so long as she was not controlling her nudity. I mean, it's scenarios of, you've come upon a woman, she has no control over it, she's trying to hide herself, that's sexy. Oh, now she's exposing her
but
breasts.
also in the Renaissance, I mean, it's because it was beautiful.
Sure, but it's never...
Stunning, because they appreciated the gorgeousness, the beauty of the sculpture.
Absolutely, but it's never appreciated as a woman standing nude and looking you in the eye.
Well,
I'm just saying, all the men have, their swords out, and I'm just saying there's a completely different attitude. That
exactly, the attitudes were very different.
No, I understand that, but I'm just pointing out. I mean, are you disagreeing with me? I don't... Because
I just think that it never even occurred to them when they were looking at some Aphrodite of Cnidos that...
But the second there's agency, it makes people uncomfortable. That's all I'm saying. The second the female nude has agency, it either has to be a joke or a scandal. It can never just be a beautiful sculpture of a nude woman who knows she's nude. The second there's agency, there is discomfort. She either has to be nude against her will, or about to cover herself because she wasn't expecting you to see her.
Yeah, but you're talking in realistic terms. We're talking in idealistic terms. I mean, these sculptures were created as ideals of beauty.
I understand.
Men also.
But there's always
with...
agency. I mean, there is always there's always a scenario in. I mean, we talk about all these myths in which these characters appear. Castor and Pollux in the middle of abducting, or Leda in the middle of being bedded by Zeus. I mean, there are stories that go with all these things. That's all I'm trying to say.
Right, but Phryne, who inspired the Cnidian, clearly had agency.
But not in that painting. I mean, that agency isn't. She's not disrobing herself. Her lawyer's disrobing her. She, in fact, is covering her face in shame and in embarrassment. Her lawyer clearly did not tell her what he was about to do in that painting. There is.
Well, yes, that's the story goes that right.
Right. Well, that's all I'm trying to say. That
it was very unexpected.
Right. That's all I'm trying to say. That. I'm only saying it because we're now seeing Manet's Olympia, where she has agency over her body, and she's basically looking at being like, yes, here I am.
But it was regarded as a painting horrible because she's completely flat. She's like back to that portrait on the...
But that's my point, that it was regarded as horrible, and I mean, it can't just be an accident that it's one of the pictures in which she has agency. That's all I'm trying to point out.
All right.
That the second a female nude has agency,
Yeah.
it has to be either a joke or a scandal. It cannot simply be a beautiful...
Yeah, well, it's too bad that we don't have our class here with us, so we could all discuss it. And if anybody would like to, by all means, we have Zoom, we have Skype, whatever.
Comment section.
Yeah.
But no, but do you disagree?
No, I agree.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, if you disagree,
Right. Well, this is the Picasso take on the same thing, because essentially what you see here, interestingly, with Picasso, who was very, very steeped in academic art and in the old masters and of course sculpture as well, and when he created, he needed a push. He was looking for. It was just one of the episodes. It was one of the experiments he needed for completely a new direction, and every direction, all roads lead to Rome, or in the case with the female nude, all roads lead to Greece, and this time he found there was an exhibit from Africa of African masks and African carved sculptures, and suddenly he figured instead of going to Rome or to Greece, he's going to go to Africa, and that's because it was a completely different attitude to a human form, of course. But he couldn't escape. He still couldn't escape. And what you see here, I mean, there she is, right here. She's just this one and this one, these two reclining nudes, and then there's your crouching nude, and the faces. Yes, he imitated the African masks, but there's just no escape from any of those.
It's funny. It's kind of half-baked in every way, because he didn't learn about the African cultures from which he was
of course not.
Pilfering.
He couldn't care less.
But nor could he fully escape.
No, he couldn't care less.
The Greco-Roman culture. Which
he cared for that. Interestingly, he cared for this.
Yeah.
I should have put another slide in.
See, this is a great example. One image, she's covering herself. Another image, she's covering herself. And in the third image, where she's fully exposed, she's in a dream. So that excuses her nudity. I'm just saying.
Okay. All right, that's fine.
Oh, shut up.
No, it's all right. The three graces, I should have put the three graces here too, because the idea of the three graces, that you portray the nude from the back and from the front. And that's what he's trying to do here, from the back, from the front, from everywhere, but in these newly acquired terms still. But his next episode, between the wars, he will realize that the Mediterranean was disappearing, and he'll go back to antiquity, and he'll be doing pencil and ink drawings, that literally jump off the old antique Greek mirrors, the bronze mirrors in the back, with all the beautiful contours, female, male contours, dream world. And but I mean, this was an episode. But this, of course, started the process. There's the next one. We're not going to. That's by de Kooning, who was a Dutch painter. And here's still another one by de Kooning, and this one sold for $10 million. Sold at Christie's 2 years ago. Oh no, for $11 million almost. But it's better, I think. Here's more de Kooning, and these are the nudes of his. But I think we're better off with these, because whether they're copies or, well, they are copies, they still convey the beauty, the elegance, the ideal, even if they don't have agency. But I think they do, because in the end they have.
That's not what I mean.
I'm
not trying to
right, but in the end they have the most.
The art. I'm just making a commentary on the nature of nudity.
I understand, but what I want to say in the end, as the conclusion, is that ultimately these had a most extraordinary agency through the years, because they became inspiration for such great art and for such extraordinary artists, and that we live with them. We live with what the Greeks achieved. We will always live with what the Greeks achieved, because no other civilization quite achieved what they did. And that goes for literature, that goes for drama, it goes for philosophy, and of course it goes for art, even though there's so little of it that we really have. And it's, well, thanks be to the Romans for copying it, however imperfectly. Well, our class is over, and I will upload the lecture. You'll have it tonight, and hopefully we'll see you in the next semester. And please stay safe.